Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here, everybody. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. We have some wonderful presenters that are going to be chatting it up. So I hope you guys are as excited for this presentation as I am. Because if you are, it means you're really excited. So um, we are really, really looking forward to this. Little expert panel that we have ready for you. And this is part one, too. So if you have the opportunity or you're able to stay awake if you're in Asia, definitely drop in for part two a little bit later in the Global eFuture Day conference. Um, but we have two very, very wonderful speakers, presenters dropping in from Brazil. We have Andre Hedlund and Rodolfo, who prefers Rudy, I believe. So we'll call him Rudy. Mattiello. I hope I'm not butchering your last name, but so Andre and Rudy are going to be presenting today. So I hope you guys enjoy. If you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. And of course, stick around all the way till the end of this presentation. So we're a little bit early, but I think we can go ahead and let them introduce themselves and say hello. So I will give the floor to you.
All right. Thank you so
All
much,
right.
Joseph. We're
Thanks, Joseph.
live, man.
Yeah,
South Korea. And I don't know where people are connecting from, so please let us know because we're really excited to be here. Right, Rudy? Yeah.
exactly. Yes. And if you guys are joining us from South Korea or from places that are super early, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you
from
so
the
much.
bottom of our hearts.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know,
Grab some
Yes,
coffee or black tea because that helps, right?
exactly. And
We
if you're
we have
joining
our
from
tea here. Yeah.
Latin America, well, it's the beginning of the evening, so I hope you guys enjoy the Friday with us. And
Yes.
something came up to me. I don't know if I told you, but we are the only ones from Latin America. Huh?
Here
We're the
today?
only
Yeah.
presenters. No, the only
Oh, the
presenters.
presenters, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
we're
that
the only
that's
ones from
that's
Latin
such an
America.
honor.
That's an
Yeah.
honor. That's a
And
huge honor.
we owe that to eFuture and this amazing
Exactly.
team and Sue, thank you so much.
Sue, thank you so
Yeti's
much.
here. Joseph, we were talking to you and
Yeah.
Hannah. So it's really a pleasure. And you know what? This is our podcast that is now turning 6 years old, right, Rudy?
Exactly.
So we
Called
started
Chá
Choc
Pedagógico.
Pedagógico. For
Exactly.
those of you who don't know what that means, it actually means pedagogical tea because, Rudy had a brilliant idea as we were watching something called Café Filosófico. So that's philosophical coffee, where basically they get a bunch of philosophers and experts to talk about very deep questions that humanity faces, right? And
Yeah.
then since we both went to college
To
in
the
the
UK.
UK,
Yeah.
Rudy said, why don't we start Shop Pedagogico? And now
Yeah.
you guys tell us, does that make any sense? Or, because I don't think we're changing the name now, right, Rudy?
Yeah,
We're
I don't think
sticking
we're
with the
gonna do
name.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you all in it's a great opportunity for you guys to learn a little bit of Portuguese. I
That is
remember
true.
some people asked us, aren't you going to change the name or translate the name to English once we
Yeah,
started hitting some other people from different countries? And we were like, not really, no. We're from Brazil. We speak Portuguese in Brazil. So it's going to be good to have
exactly.
a Brazilian name uh, in the world. And it
Exactly.
is right
And it
now.
is right
And it
now.
is right
Exactly.
now,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. We couldn't
So,
be happier.
exactly. So, once again, guys, thank you so much. And as you join us, tell us in the chat here, in the chat box here, where you're from. We really want to know where you guys are calling from, watching
Please
us
let us
from.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you know what? So we're here today to talk about a couple of questions that you folks sent over to eFuture. Oh, we have someone from Greece. Oh, we have something.
Wow. Hera.
We have some back. We shouldn't tell people, but whenever
2
we use a
a.m.
Greek word,
2
we
a.m.
have to
Oh, yeah.
we
Yeah.
have to
Oh,
take a
yeah.
sip of
Yeah.
something. Whatever. We're
Hera.
drinking some tea.
Hopefully,
So
hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully we're pronouncing your name correctly, Hera. Yeah, we do have an internal game that Andre and I we play together. Every time
Yeah.
we pronounce or we use a Greek word or a Greek
Yeah.
rooted word,
We drink. Yeah.
bottoms up.
So tea.
And just so you know, yeah, it's
Yeah.
tea. Okay, we're drinking tea. All right, so bottoms
Yeah,
up for
even though
tea.
it's late, but we
Yeah.
like tea. And today,
So we have
so
Tasia. Tasia is a good friend of ours. Hello,
thank you so
Tasia. We
much,
have
Tassia.
Luis Javier Chavez from Panama.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
And
Ana Silvia from
Anna, she's
Brazil.
from Brazil, but she is in London right now. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank
Amazing.
you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And so I was saying that today we're gonna try to answer some questions. I mean, you sent a lot of questions, a lot of
Mhm.
great questions
Mhm.
about ELT, English language teaching, teaching in general, whatever goes on in the classroom. And Rudy and I just went over the questions and thought maybe we can tackle this, as like categories, different categories. So we don't have to
Mhm.
answer every question because I think that will kind of mess up a little bit our dynamic. So we
Yeah.
clustered many of the questions
We
under certain,
structured so we can be a
under
little bit
certain
logical.
categories, right?
But
Yeah,
guys, seriously, as we speak, if you have questions, interact with us in the chat box, okay? Because
yeah,
we're going to address some of the questions you asked us that you sent to us. But in the meantime, if you have some comments and if you want to ask us some questions, use the
yeah,
chat box because the chat box is here. I'm checking, I'm
exactly.
taking a look at the chat box right now. We have
Cambodia.
Cambodia. Wow, that's
That's
so cool.
amazing.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much. And
Yes.
I think, dude, I think the first thing that we could address to
Yeah.
start this conversation that we're having with you guys is about motivation.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think, especially some of the examples, and this is very important, some of the examples that we'll use throughout the conversation today, they're going to be basically based on our experience as a language teacher here in Brazil and the Brazilian
Exactly.
scenario for language teaching. Okay.
But
So
also,
if you have,
if I may add, also we're going to share some tips from authors and papers,
yeah,
academic
for sure.
papers,
For sure.
especially because
For
we
sure.
like to geek out a little bit and talk about science as well,
Super.
right? I even
Super.
have
You
Hannibal
got
here
Hannibal.
to talk
Nice.
about how motivation
Nice.
works in the brain, right? So,
Nice.
shall we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we do have here in Brazil, because again, if this is brand new information for you guys, good. But here in Brazil, the official language is Portuguese.
Yeah.
And Brazil is a gigantic country. It's a continental country, super big. And and the last results that we had of an exam that was implemented some years ago, around 5 to 6% of the population in our population here is gigantic. We're talking about almost 220 million people. So only
Exactly.
5 to 6% actually have proficiency in English. Okay.
Yes.
We're going to use English as a different language here in Brazil. This means that many students here in Brazil don't have the motivation to actually learn a different language.
Exactly.
Because they say, and this is true, I've been working as a language teacher for over 25 years. Andre, not 25, he says he's not that old, but
20 years, yeah.
But he is getting there. You're getting
we're
there.
Getting old. You can see, gray hair, right? Yeah. So we're getting
no,
old.
this is like, this is
it's charming.
Light. This is the light.
Yeah, it's the light, right?
It's the light.
That's
the light.
you. Yeah.
It's the light.
Yeah.
And that's actually correct because many students, regardless of their age, when they come to us, when we teach them, they say, why do I need to learn a language that I'm not going to use every day?
Exactly.
Yeah. And we know, let's start geeking out a little bit. We know that if we don't have motivation, and we're not talking about, because there are some conversations about intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation.
And I will talk about that in a while. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not getting into that right now, but we're talking about motivation as in general. If we don't have a motivation, we're not going to pay attention to anything.
Exactly.
Because why are we going to pay attention if I am not motivated to do that? And if there's no attention, there's no what, dude? Do the
There's
honors.
no memory. And if there's no memory, there's no learning. So
Exactly.
basically, what Rudy's saying is that motivation is where everything starts, you know? So one of the things we know from research is that there are different sources of motivation, you know, and normally people say something that I don't agree with because, you know, scientifically speaking, it doesn't make sense. If you don't have motivation, you should have discipline. So motivation is not really necessary as long as you
Mhm.
have discipline. But discipline is a type of motivation, but it comes from a different source, maybe. So Rudy said, well, there are different types of motivation. What we know from a psychological perspective is that you are either intrinsically motivated, so it's genuine because of your interest, your curiosity, because
Mhm.
it's something that attracts you, and then you go and do it, do whatever you have to do, you pay attention, you do the homework, you know, you engage, or you are extrinsically motivated because someone is forcing you to do something, or
Yeah.
because you want people's admiration, or because you know you need to impress someone, or because your parents told you to do. Either way, there is a substance in the brain, a neurotransmitter in the brain that is, I should call it the neurotransmitter of motivation, which
Yeah.
is dopamine, right? So without dopamine,
Aha.
you don't do things, right,
Yeah.
Rudy? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And we have to be very careful because basically, every time we get motivated, to be very honest, every time we are excited about something,
Yeah.
our body is going to release dopamine. We are going to have
Yeah.
release of dopamine all the time, all the time. The brain is going to do that. It can be for simple reasons, for instance, sense of achievement. So when we have the sense of achievement, this is going to be understood by the brain as a motivational factor. There is going to be a release of dopamine. We have
Yeah.
to be very careful not to um, go over the top with the release of dopamine, but we need to
Yes.
understand what makes our students excited. And when we say what makes our students excited, we are not saying that we have to be performers, we have to be artists, nor anything like that.
Entertainers, you know, like
Entertainers.
dance, TikTokers, you know,
I
no,
know
you have
Joseph
to do.
likes to dance. Joseph,
Well, he likes to
I
teach
understand.
teachers how to dance, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I know sometimes this can be a very nice idea,
Yeah.
but not always. We're not talking about this. When we say
Yeah.
motivation, for example, challenges, challenges can be a
Exactly.
motivation.
Exactly.
It's important to challenge the student
Yeah.
because
And
for
and you
some
know, the
reason,
need to know. Let me just add,
yeah,
when you challenge them with a quiz or whatever, they need to know. And that need sparks, you know, curiosity, and that leads to motivation, right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, there is a very interesting term that can also be used and understood as a challenge gamification. You can gamify
Yes.
your
Yeah.
lessons, for example, regardless of
Yeah.
their age. And why am I repeating? I'm saying regardless of their age all the time. I think this is like the third or fourth time I'm saying regardless of their age,
Yeah.
because there is this misconception that only kids or maybe teenagers get excited when you gamify a lesson. Not true. Adult
No,
learners can
that's yeah.
also be very well challenged, can be motivated once you gamify your lesson. And when I say
Exactly.
gamify, I'm not saying that you have necessarily to um, transform your lesson plan into a game. No,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about challenges.
Yeah.
And once they achieve whatever they had to achieve, linguistically speaking, or in the task, whatever, tell your students that they've achieved whatever they had to achieve. There's a very
Exactly.
interesting book by John Hattie. We mentioned this book in several opportunities. We've already,
Yeah.
it's called Visible Learning by John
Visible
Hattie.
learning.
Visible
Exactly.
Learning.
Yeah.
This is a motivational factor as well, because especially with languages,
Yeah.
when we're dealing with languages, it's very difficult for people in general. Okay, even us teachers, it's very hard for us to see the progress because it's
Exactly.
not tangible. There's no visual um, resource. There's nothing that makes us look at that and say, okay, I started here. Now I'm there. I'm progressing. So it's our job as teachers to actually show our students, tell them. You can be
Yeah.
super straightforward with them. You
And
can
now,
just
you
say,
know,
like, guys, did you
yeah.
realize what you have just done in this task? Look and tell them what they
Yeah.
did. This
And
is
you
a
know what?
motivational factor.
Exactly. So there's research showing that instead of trying to motivate your students prior to the activity that you're trying to get them to do, having them do the activity and experience a sense of fulfillment or accomplishment is
Yeah.
incredibly motivating. So normally what we do, and I think everybody who goes to the gym or everybody who runs in the park knows this feeling, right? So you wake up, you don't want to
Mhm.
get up, you start browsing on your phone, you look at your social media notifications, and then you get that very cheap dopamine shot, that release of dopamine early in the morning. And that's good enough for your brain. Your brain's okay, that's good enough. I'll just stay here. But yeah, I have to go to work, whatever. But here's the thing, when you need to actually get up and go to the park and start working out or go to the gym and start working out, there were many days you didn't want to go, right? Because you were not motivated. Yeah.
Mhm.
But once you go, when you begin the activity, you feel better.
Yeah.
And at the end of the activity, you feel much better because you release other neurotransmitters, serotonin, for example, endorphins, and all of those,
Mhm.
this cocktail of neurotransmitters, they will give you a sense of fulfillment that will be motivating in itself, right? So how you guys asked here, how do you motivate your students? How do you deal with students who don't want to participate, and students who have difficulties? If you can involve them and give them that sense of accomplishment, they feel like I've done this,
Mhm.
I got this. They
Mhm.
will feel motivated, right? So
Yeah.
we have to give our students more opportunities to succeed at what they're doing, and that's going to
Exactly.
motivate them, right?
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
once again, there's nothing tangible. There's
Yeah.
nothing that you can show your students and say that they'll say, okay, I didn't know that. Now I do. And I I used what I just learned to
Yeah.
perform whatever activity or to perform whatever task that was assigned to them. So show them, tell them. And this can also be part, no, let me change that. This
Yeah.
has to be part of our lesson plan.
Speaking of
It
which, we have to
has
talk
to be.
about that. Yeah.
That's the cue. That's the
Yeah, that's the cue, right?
that's the cue.
Did you
Man,
get that?
we
I
rehearsed
spoiled
that.
it. Did
We
we?
rehearsed that.
Oh, this Steven is not good.
We
I gotta
rehearsed
change
it.
the T.
We rehearsed
But
it.
before you talk about lesson planning, in case you were wondering where you can find us online, you can
Yes.
follow our podcast, and we have an episode every last Sunday of the month. So make sure you
Mhm.
follow us, subscribe, and we talk about this and many other things. So, Rudy,
Yeah.
lesson planning. What's the
Yeah.
best framework? Is there one?
Exactly. Well,
Should we? What do you
first of all,
think?
that was
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
no. To be very honest, no, we didn't
Yeah.
rehearse anything. We just
No.
structured the whole conversation with you guys so we could make more sense to you. So we just
Yeah.
showed up. We just couldn't come here and show up like empty-handed, but we didn't
Exactly.
rehearse
Yeah.
anything. But um, showing your students what they've accomplished has to be part of your lesson plan, like
Exactly.
many other things. For
Yeah.
example, the amount of minutes and seconds that you're going to use to greet your students for icebreakers, for presentations of linguistic models, for drilling activities,
Yeah.
for performance activities, corrections, and everything. This has to be part of your lesson plan. It has to look like a script. If you've ever seen a script, like a movie script, the
Yeah.
one that script that actors receive, Hollywood actors, for instance, they receive a script.
More like Quentin Tarantino, not Christopher Nolan, because Christopher Nolan that never changes his script.
Well, man,
We're more like
I
Quentin, go with
love
the flow.
Tarantino.
You know,
You know me
sometimes
for you
you
know
gotta
me
go to
long
Plan
enough.
B,
You
right?
know that Tarantino
Yeah,
has a special place in my heart. I love his
of
movies,
course, right?
and he is freaking awesome, and his movies are
Save
freaking
some room
awesome.
for improvisation because, we're dealing with
Yeah,
human
exactly.
beings,
Yes, yes,
and they
and
change, right? Yeah.
but this script is super important because then you're going to
Yeah.
be able to actually understand, because one of the questions you sent us was, how do you teach mixed levels and all these things?
Yeah.
Well, if you have a group of 15, 20 students, more than that, less than that, anyway. So if you
Yeah.
have a group of mixed level students with different proficiency levels, how are you going to be able to actually make something effective
Yeah.
if you don't have a script? You're going to show up in the classroom empty-handed, and you're just going to do what? Open your books
Yeah.
a page, whatever. And then,
Exactly.
because remember, the motivational factor, if you have a very high proficient student in your group, I mean, high proficient according to the level of your groups, okay? Of your group. So if you have
Yeah.
a high proficient student in the group, this high proficient student is going to feel demotivated because there's not
Yes.
going to be any challenge, and the low proficiency, the very low proficiency, the one that has a lot of difficulties, that
Yeah.
student is also going to be demotivated because they are going
Overwhelmed.
to,
Yeah.
exactly, because they are going
Exactly.
to look at the activity and they're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
how do I do that? I don't
Yeah.
know how I
Yeah.
do that. I don't know how to do that,
And
So
I just
so
wanted to,
the
yeah.
script, just to
Yeah.
wrap up, there
Yeah.
must be a script with every single step from
Exactly.
minute 5 to minute 603. I'm going
Yeah.
to assign an activity, and I'm going to have my high proficient student help the others.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I'm going to describe in your lesson plan what you'll do. This is going to help you a
Exactly.
lot.
And we don't want to tell you guys to over plan and plan thoroughly, like every time you deliver a lesson. But it's really I don't know if any of you here have thought about getting the CELTA or Delta or something like that, or other certificates or courses that you have to go through that phase where you really spend a lot of time planning. And we're not promoting that, but I think it's important for you to go through that phase so you get the hang of it, and then it becomes something that comes more naturally to you when you're doing it. And I think a rule of thumb, like Rudy said, because once you've planned your lesson down to the minute, like exactly what's going to take place, and you have different activities, or actually you have different levels for the same levels of challenge for the same activity, because you're differentiating your lesson for different students. So you know what? This student has to do the fill in the gap activity in their book, and they will read, and then they have to choose the words from the box and fill in the gaps. The other student who needs more challenge will not read the words in the box, so they have to guess which words fit here. Or maybe instead of reading, they will do it in pairs, and then someone will read to them, and then they will try to. So instead of doing a reading activity, they will listen to their peer and answer the question. So it's the same thing. It's the same activity. You're just changing
You
the
just
level of
offer different
challenge.
challenges. You offer different
Exactly.
challenges. That's
Yeah.
why you need to have a lesson plan. That's why you need to have a script, because you're not going to be able to do this on the spot. It's
Yeah.
impossible. It's not
It's
going to
exactly
work.
that.
It's gonna look a little bit clumsy and a
Yeah.
little bit slouchy, and
Yeah.
just don't plan
Yeah.
ahead. Plan
And you know
ahead.
what? What people often ask is, what is a good framework or method to plan
Mm.
your lesson? Well, I don't think there's a one size fits all method
Mm-mm.
that you can use and it's going to work every time. However, I think many methods, they are telling us something. Many frameworks, they're kind of pointing at something. They're giving us a certain direction. So, for example, most of you here use the PPP framework, right?
Mhm.
Presentation, practice, and production.
Let's ask them. Let's ask them,
Yeah. Do you?
guys.
Yeah.
What
Tell
kind
us
of
in the
framework?
chat.
What kind of
Yeah.
approach do you use in the classroom with your students? Tell us in the
Yeah.
chat box here.
Tell us in the chat.
We really want to know what kind of approach do we
Yeah.
use, because here in Brazil, the
This is very
PPP,
common. Yeah.
see, PPP,
See? Yeah.
3P,
Most
because
people.
this has been very common in Brazil for the last 10, 12 years.
Even more, like what?
It-
Yeah, but yeah, like 20 years, maybe,
well, yeah,
maybe depending on the
that's
school.
how old we are.
Yeah,
20 years. You're absolutely right.
yeah,
20 years.
yes,
So
exactly. But
this has
this is
been
one
very
possibility, right?
just one.
That's one because
That's just,
I
and
was
it's very
talking. Yeah,
flexible. And it's
it
very
is.
flexible. You don't have to go through
Yeah.
the three P's every single class.
I mean, you shouldn't have to go, but that's the thing that teachers don't get, I think, that they feel forced to go through all the stages, and
Yeah.
but that really depends on many factors. There's another framework that you might know from Jeremy Harmer, ESA, right?
Mhm.
Engage, study, activate. That
Activate.
sort of does the same, and I think if you look at the acronym, ESA makes more sense to me from a neuroscientific perspective than PPP, because engage so that you can motivate your students to pay attention, because if they don't pay attention, no memory, they don't make no new memories, no learning. So engaging is the very first step, of course, but then study the new content, build new knowledge, and then activate by using it somehow in a more hands-on way. But that
And,
doesn't happen just in one lesson, right, Rudy?
but
You
that's
have
the
to
thing.
consolidate memory throughout
Remember
the
when we
day.
said
Yeah,
that, dude, you just said a couple of minutes ago,
yeah,
there is no one size fits all, and there
yeah,
isn't. Because if you compare, for example, if you really say, Rudy, Andre, I work at a school and I cannot get rid of the three P's or the PPP. I
yeah,
have to use the PPP. Don't
yeah.
worry. If you overlap the ESA with the PPP, you're going to see that you have a lot of similarities, a lot. For example,
Exactly.
engage. How are you going to engage your students? You're going to
Yeah.
have an icebreaker. You're going to call their attention. Icebreaker is part
Present
of what?
something in an interesting way.
Presentation.
Yeah,
It's part of the first P,
yeah,
presentation, you know? And then uh, you say, okay, I engaged my students. Now uh, I have to have my students practice something. I have to have my students
exactly.
perform, do whatever they need to do,
Yeah.
which is
Study the new content, right?
the second
Yeah,
P,
yeah,
practice. You're going to come up with new things. You can also have your students uh, think about the language. And if this is
yeah.
not an option for you, you can just go for guided practice with drilling activities, but they are going to use the language. And that's key.
Yeah.
They need
And
to
drilling
use the
is
language.
important. Yes.
Language
Repetition is
use
important. Yeah.
has to be there regardless of their age, regardless of what the school you work for. So
Yeah.
you have another overlapping situation. And then
That's
the
it.
last one, performance. So they have to activate. They have to basically get what they've just learned and use what they
it.
just learned freely, which is
Yeah.
also the third P. So we have overlapping situations and overlapping moments with the
Exactly.
with SA, with PPP. But do I have, as we said, do we have to go through all the P's every class?
Yeah.
No, you don't. It's another thing. As you create some bond with your students, you're going to be paying attention to what their needs are.
Yeah.
And there are many ways you can record
Exactly.
that. So, for instance, you can have a notebook, and then you write their names on the notebook and say, okay, I have John. What are John's needs? This, and that. Okay, what about Mary? What are Mary's needs? This, and that.
And you know
Okay,
what, man?
what about
Yeah.
Rudy's? Rudy's, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah. And then
Yeah.
when you prepare your lesson, you're going to address those needs. You're going to define some activities that will address those needs.
Exactly.
And as you give them an opportunity to work freely, for example, you're going to be like giving them a chance to achieve a specific goal. They're going to feel good about it.
Yeah.
And
a sense of
at the same
accomplishment.
time,
Yeah.
and at the same time, address their needs.
Yeah.
If for some reason they need this moment in which they They use the language in a freer situation with no interference of the teacher because you understood that. You took notes of that. You realized that,
Yeah.
That's what
You
we
have
do
to
as
keep track.
teachers.
Got to
You have to keep track.
keep track of what your students are doing or how they're performing. And I think that relates closely to classroom management. That
Mm-hmm.
is also part of this category because if you plan your lesson down to the minute, you know what's going on. It's really structured. It's differentiated because you're giving different students, mixed level groups, right? You're giving
Yep.
them different opportunities to do different things stemming from the same activity because you don't want to overplan. We're teachers, we're busy, we are exhausted. We don't want to make our lives more complicated, but we have to think of alternatives to this activity. How can this activity
Mm-hmm.
become more challenging for those who need it to be more challenging? And how can it become less challenging for those who are struggling, right? And one of the things you will notice when you do that is that when your students get to the stages, so they're engaged, they start practicing and building knowledge, you are monitoring, you're giving instructions, you're practicing with them. And then there will be a moment at the end of the lesson. So every lesson should have some kind of production so
Yeah.
that, like Rudy said, usage based, right? So they have to use it, otherwise they will lose it. That's a
Mm-hmm.
a saying that we got from
Mm-hmm.
neuroscience. So if
Yeah.
they do use it, they will give evidence to you of where they are, where they stand in terms of the language that they're supposed to reproduce in that lesson, and that will be your thermometer. You will say, okay, this student here was not able to perform this.
Yeah.
So maybe this student is the one who's not paying a lot of attention. So this student is the one who's starting all the classroom management problems. And this is the student who's not helping me help them learn more. So you have to rethink your
Mm-hmm.
strategies, right? But that's
Yes.
important to give them this opportunity to show, right, Rudy?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And then as you keep track of your students' needs,
Yeah.
my recommendation is, mm, well, to be very simple here, you
Yeah.
can separate their needs into and break their needs into the four main linguistic skills.
Yes.
Do my students need have a need in speaking and listening? Do they need to read better? Do they need to write better? Do they have a demand for writing? Do they have a demand for whatever the four linguistic skills are?
Yeah.
To be very simple, can you make it more sophisticated? Yes, you can. But I think for the conversation here, if you address these four linguistic skills, that's okay.
Exactly.
You're already doing a lot of stuff. And
Exactly.
how are you going to address their needs? So for example, speaking skills. I think the first thing we have to bear in mind is if you have your students read something out loud, that is not speaking. That's
That's
not
true.
speaking.
That's
You know,
true. They'll be
speaking
they'll be
is
worried about their pronunciation
they'll be
and
worried
not
about
really.
a
Yeah.
lot of other stuff, about
Yeah.
pronunciation, about um, recognizing understanding the message.
Yeah.
It's anything but speaking.
Exactly.
If you want to produce, if you want to explore their oral skills,
Yeah.
first of all, it has to be something that is unexpected. It has to be unexpected. For example, you guys have no idea what I'm about to say.
Yeah. It's spontaneous.
Now, see, you don't know.
Yes.
It's a spontaneous. And at
Yeah.
the same time, they'll have to, as we speak, for example, you guys are being hit by my sound waves and everything I'm telling you guys. And then you'll have time to process these things, understand everything,
Yeah.
make meaning of everything. It's the same with our students. So you have to, when
Exactly.
you design an activity that is you want to explore their oral skills, their
Yeah.
productive skills in speech. Um, think about the unexpected. how am I going to bring it to the classroom? For example, one very simple way you can do this, asking them
Yeah,
questions. Asking questions.
exactly.
Yes. If you let's say you're teaching simple present, first person simple present. Okay.
Yeah,
I work, I don't work. I love, I don't love, etc. Okay. Very simple thing. Very simple thing here. What
yeah,
you can ask your student, if you want to see if your student's able to actually um, decode whatever you're saying and at the same time produce and keep this exchange, just ask a simple question like,
yeah.
do you love spaghetti? Let's say that you're talking about food. Do you love spaghetti? If for some reason your student says, oh, yes, my car is really amazing. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
There's something wrong. There's something wrong. But if for some reason,
Evidence-based, right? You have to
evidence
collect
based,
evidence
there's
to
something
say,
wrong.
hey, my student's learning, my student's not learning. Yeah,
But if your student says something like, yes, I love spaghetti,
yeah,
great, perfect, you know, Rudy,
exactly.
but I need to practice negative sentences as well. How am I going to do that? Ask them a very ridiculous question, a question that you
Yeah.
know they're going to say no. For instance, is the earth flat?
They might
No.
say yes. So be careful. Nowadays, a lot of people might actually say yes. Okay. So, so we got
No.
to be careful with that, you know.
But
But you know
no.
what? One of the things that I really wanted to add to this is that we have traditionally focused on teaching more receptive skills.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talk a lot about input, right? And because we've
Mhm.
been influenced by the big guys, you know, Krashen, Chomsky, right? So
Oh
there's
boy.
something called the input hypothesis. So basically, we think that people just need to be in an environment, a rich environment in terms of linguistic production, right? So if I am in a place where people are using the language all the time, I will pick up the language because I have a language acquisition device in my brain. And then I will make inferences and whatever. So that's input, that's receptive skills because you're listening or maybe you're just reading a lot of text. However, we don't really have a language acquisition device according to neuroscience. And we will only practice or get better, let's say, at speaking and writing. Those are not receptive skills, those are productive skills if we do
Exactly.
them. Like, you cannot learn how to drive a car by watching videos of people driving cars or watching videos of people teaching you how to drive a car. You can
Yeah.
only learn how to drive a car by driving the car. And you can only learn how to speak by speaking. So instead of focusing too much on Krashen and Chomsky and input, we have to also remember there's a theory by Swain, the output hypothesis,
Oh yeah.
which is really about that. So if I'm speaking, I'm using different memory systems in my brain to actually produce speech. Broca's
Yes.
area, to actually understand speech.
Vernix area.
Wernicke's area, right? So those are different systems. I will
Yeah.
not. I cannot improve my speaking by listening. You know, of course, I can
Okay, okay, okay,
pick
okay.
up
Wait a minute. Wait a
a
minute.
couple of things, you know,
Is
but
Hannibal
it's
still
not.
there? Is Hannibal still
Hannibal's
there?
here. Yeah,
Okay, show
definitely. Yeah.
everyone. Okay, where's Broca's area? Go
So
ahead.
this is Broca's area, guys. Yeah. This is about speech production. Speech
Yeah.
production right here.
Motor
Now,
motor skills.
motor skills, right? It's how the
Yeah.
mechanics of how we produce language,
Yeah.
spoken language, right? And this
Yeah.
is Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's
Hmm.
area is language comprehension, right?
Yes.
Those are
Exactly.
different areas, they're connected, but you can only learn how to speak if you speak. You
Hmm.
can only learn how to be fluent if you speak spontaneously, freely. Otherwise, you won't, right?
Can you
But
control it? Yes, you
yeah,
can. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be as spontaneous. It will be because our students have
exactly.
still going back to what I said. You can ask them some questions using the construction you want them to use. Um, if you ask them the questions, they won't
Yeah,
know what the questions are. They'll have
yeah,
no idea what they are. And then that's the spontaneous aspect of your lesson, of your
yeah,
activity, you know.
yeah,
And this is going to help your students use the language
Exactly.
very closely to what they'll use in real life. Because
And we're
again,
not saying
why?
throw them into the the
Oh,
the, the
no, no, no,
lion's
no,
den. No, no,
no,
no.
no,
You
no,
can
no,
help
no.
them. You can
Yeah,
help them
yeah.
scaffold,
Scaffold.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, no. But you have to let them be free so they can practice their fluency, right?
And
Yeah.
another very important thing, we also have an episode of Chá Pedagógico. You just have to, I saw that Andre
Yeah,
posted the link here in the chat box. If you go there, you're going
exactly.
to be redirected to all the episodes that we've had so far. We have
Yep.
a different house ever since last year. We got a different house for Chá Pedagógico. But anyway, we had an episode talking about normative teaching. Don't
Exactly.
focus on the rules. Andra mentioned a couple of minutes ago, you're not going to learn how to drive a car by watching videos of people driving their cars. No, because if you do that, you're basically being exposed to the rules of how to drive a car.
Yeah.
And that's not going to be useful. Why are you going to focus on the rule? Okay, here's the subject, here's the verb, here's the object.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Especially
That's
because that's not what we,
secondary. That's secondary,
I would
you
say
know?
that's irrelevant, I'd say, because these
Yeah.
rules, according to cognitive linguistics, uh, I have studies from
Yeah.
Professor Eva Dabrowska that I mention all the time, and then Ronald Langacker, William Kraft, Michael Tomasello.
Yeah.
When we learn a language, we develop these rules. We develop the rules. And if we do the other way around, if we impose the rules, forget it, because then they're going to be so focused on the rule that they're
Yeah.
not going to be able to actually use the language.
And it's
So
a
no,
different memory.
offer them completely
Yeah.
different. Offer chunks. I was going to say Chomsky.
Yeah.
No, chunks.
Chomsky, yeah.
Chunks. Offer
Yeah.
chunks, because then these chunks, they are going to be meaningful to them.
Yeah.
Not that it's going to be meaningful automatically. No, because these chunks are going to represent a situation. The chunks are going to represent an object, a person, whatever, and then the person that's being exposed to that chunk is going to be responsible for understanding that and creating meaning. After
But
they
you know,
create the
yeah.
meaning, then the person recurrence, because then this chunk
Exactly.
is going to be used
Yeah.
again and again in
Yeah.
different contexts, in different situations, up until the moment that this person is going to be like, oh, okay. So
Now I get it,
what
right?
if I
Yeah.
change, instead of saying, I love spaghettis, what if I try to say, I love Formula One races? Okay, I
Yeah.
don't want to use Formula One races. I want to use now, I love basketball because I really like
Yeah.
basketball. And then this person is going to generalize and form not
Exactly.
necessarily a rule. They're going to form a schema or a schemata. We don't know if these schemes are going to be translated into a language. Some people say, oh, this is internal language or I language. We don't know.
Yeah.
Because that's why we always say our thoughts have no official language. We don't think in a
language.
specific language. We don't
So stop
know
saying
how we think.
you have to start thinking in English.
Yeah,
You just think,
because there's no
then,
such thing.
Yeah.
We have 5 more minutes.
But so let's add one more point here and talk about assessment and correction, right? Because so what Rudy is saying, and I think it's important for us to mention this, is like, so how do you teach grammar? Just to give you an example. Do you teach it more inductively or deductively? Like, do you allow your students to figure out the rule, or do you over explain the rule and then use models or whatever? You can use both ways. But what Rudy is saying is sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about the labels of that grammar rule in another language, in this additional second language. So let's say we're explaining, I don't know, present perfect, which is a big one here in Brazil. And then you talk about verb tenses and timeline, and you talk about participle and auxiliary and whatever. those pieces of information are actually leading your students to cognitive overload because they don't get the language. So it's actually better for you to use a model that connects to their language, so you don't have to over explain those labels, and then introduce the rule or let them figure out the rule. So you don't have to overuse the lingo that goes with the grammar structure. And that ties in with the last topic, because we have like 3 minutes, which is so how do you assess and how do you give feedback, right, Rudy? Yeah. And I think just to add one thing, and then you can finish it off. I think the thing is, we always talk about different types of assessment: summative, formative. Summative is more about, looking backwards, like applying an exam, giving them a mark, like a number, a score. And formative is more ongoing and checking what they're doing. I think both forms are very important, because they have to learn how to take tests as well, right? But assessment should be a daily part of your practice, because then you have enough time to intervene in case something is happening. So if you don't pay attention to what your students are doing, and suddenly when you apply this test, they have no idea why they got such a low grade, it's because maybe we're not paying attention and applying formative assessment throughout the course to say, hey, there's something here. Let's intervene here. Let's help the student here. How do you help them? Giving them very good, specific, high quality feedback, not try again. Tell them exactly what they got wrong. Tell them exactly what they did right, and be supportive. And then you keep them motivated, right, Rudy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And some people may say, but I work at a school and my principal or whoever's in charge is constantly telling me that I cannot be straightforward. I cannot do that. I have to use a different technique. That's okay. For example, one of the techniques that we have for feedback is recast. So you repeat whatever the person was trying to say, but you repeat it correctly. And then you hope the person will actually understand where the problem was. Well, there are many authors that say, is this effective? Yes, it is, because we do this. This is this was extracted from a technique that we use when we engage in a social conversation. For example, we do that, but when you're teaching, then you depend on the student realizing where the problem is.
Yeah.
That's too much. It's too far-fetched. So
it goes back to attention. If they don't pay attention that they got it wrong and you're correcting them, they won't make new memories. They won't learn.
There is not only attention. It's about a metacognitive skill. If your student doesn't have a very honed cognitive skill, this is like, this is happening all in your student's mind. My teacher said this because probably what I said was wrong and the problem was here. So now I have to say it correctly. Oof, too far-fetched. So no, be very straightforward. Just say, you need a present tense here. You need past tense there. You forgot a D here. You don't have to elevate your teaching talking time, but you go straight to the problem. You point out where the problem was.
Yeah.
And I think 45 minutes. We broke our own record.
Yeah.
We broke our own record.
Longer.
We never did that. In 6 years, we never did that. Oh, Sue says something.
Yeah.
Whoa, we're being streamed in China.
That's awesome. Amazing. And somebody from Peru just said... Yeah. Tanya said that she hadn't heard of Chá Pedagógico, but just listening to us now gives her an idea of how interesting and enriching the topics are.
Oh,
cool.
Thank you so much.
Please subscribe and watch us.
I just posted the link to all the episodes we've recorded since we got a new house on YouTube. Just go subscribe to the channel, and you can also find us on our socials. Andres' handle is The Learning
I'll
Cosmos.
share here. Yeah.
Sure. Can you share mine as well?
Yeah,
please?
Sure.
And my handle is Mattiello Consultoria, so you can find us on
here.
Instagram.
Hey,
you know,
Patricia.
but
Yes.
please find us on Instagram, find us on YouTube as well, you know. And as you do that, let me go. Oh, hadn't heard Tanya. Tanya, where are you from? Oh, Peru.
Yeah.
Oh, gracias, gracias.
Cool.
Man, we were being
Querétaro. I
extremely.
was there, Claudia. I had
Oh,
this
Claudia was in
mole de
Mexico. Oh,
olla.
that
That
was
was
so
really
cool.
good.
Gracias, gracias.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, guys. It was awesome. Thank you.